one-legged man.
I know, but I keep on feeling you're flipping me off.
That's a funny show.
Well, we're now live on the air with
So,
Wire106 Season 2, Episode 8.
that's right. And little PSA before we get started, Paul. A lot of people signed up for this show, but Imran and Maggie, who have been, there from the beginning, let's just say, who have been with us in these discussions, they're going to be in the gated community. They're going to be in the circle of trust. And all the other zombies in the gated community, they're going to get eaten. They're going to get pulled up, talking intestines, talking brains, and I will have no mercy. Just as an F1. Get to these discussions. You got to do 3 before the end of the semester. I'm tired of you hippies signing up and then saying no. What am I? Chopped liver? Huh? Paul, aren't you offended?
It's the way it goes, I guess. I don't know.
You're easy. All right. But let's focus on those who care. Hi, Imran. Hi, Maggie.
Hi.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, you said this was episode 8, right?
Yeah.
What's the title of this one?
Duck and cover.
Duck and cover, yeah.
All right. Any initial thoughts about the title before we look at the actual episode?
Well, there was the duck.
There was the duck. That's right. The alcoholic duck.
Yeah.
Ziggy. The seeing duck, right?
Yeah.
Seeing eye duck. Right. And what was the epigraph for this one?
The epigraph. I have it right here. Let me call it up. How come they don't fly away? Let me share that.
And that Ziggy.
Yeah, Ziggy's line.
Yeah. Some people in the discussion last night, we did that watch along again, and some people in the discussion last night, at least 1 or 2, suggested that, they kind of felt the Ziggy. And they very few people like Ziggy. Critically, one of the things that I think a lot of people had between season 1 and season 2 is how they felt an unlikable character, but also just unbelievable. And so Ziggy got a lot of crap from some critics, not too much, not enough to kind of pan the season, but he was not a crowd favorite. But on the third watching, I kind of like Ziggy a little bit.
Yeah.
Not you, Paul?
No. I still want to pimp slap him.
That's right. Imran, Maggie, Ziggy, yay or nay?
I don't know, I don't necessarily enjoy some of the antics I've had to witness on the show because of him. But I think he's really interesting, and I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics, especially between him and Nick, and especially putting Ziggy in there makes the relationship between Frank and Nick very interesting. Just seeing how Ziggy relates to both Nick and Frank.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I tend to think that for me, what I felt with Ziggy this season is, or at least watching this season this time, is he's a far more complex character than when I first hated him because of his antics, like you said, and kind of streaking and the duck. And he's easy to dislike, but you can see this kind of deep reaction he's having to the life that was. And it's that speech he gives to his father about when he was young, and he remembers all the stevedores around the table, and that sense that he'll never get back. You really just see he's unanchored, right? He's just floating. He has no sense of who he is. And it's pretty I understand what some people would argue. It's a little bit beaten over your head. I won't take Nick's money. I won't listen to my dad. I'm a kind of rebellious child who's still trying to figure out who he is. And I understand that that's not a deep reading per se because it's so on the surface. But it doesn't make it any less true. And his character, maybe part of why people react to him so viscerally is because he does it so well.
Yeah, I was thinking that Frank is the smart-ass pawn that made it to the other side of the board, and now he's the power player.
Yeah.
And Ziggy is seeing that he's never going to do that.
Yeah.
That game is gone,
And there's a lot of that, too. I mean, the idea that Nick is better than him, Nick can play the game a little bit better, and his father, too. And I think that probably pisses him off.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start sharing some screens. I think this is from you, Imran. So I'm going to put this up. This is the band's all back together. What do you think about this one? Am I right, or is this you, Maggie?
It's not mine.
I think that's me. That's me. Alright. Well, I remember when I saw this scene, I was like, they're usually like working their like work clothes, like they're all suited up. But like now this particular like scene when everyone's together, it's like they're like this, and then there's like Bunk that comes in later. He's just wearing like his sweatshirt.
Yeah. I mean, Bunk in a sweatshirt is a kind of it's an interesting sight.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't someone say to that when that was happening, like, weren't you born in pinstripes?
Yeah.
And here's another shot. Let me know if this goes full screen, if you guys can see this better. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think of this, Imran? This is another one you shared.
Yeah, it's like same thing before. Is like except Lester and Daniels and the attorney, like they're just all like they're not like in the usual workflow, but I'm just still quite questioning like why aren't they like, are they gonna go somewhere on the cover or something,
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting. One of the people was mentioned last night. Like the band's all back together now, right? Like everybody's there again, and
Yeah.
it's an interesting moment, right?
And also, like, one thing, I think I sent in a similar screenshot of the whole like team together. Is it excluding Rhonda? I think they're all wearing really similar colors in their clothes. Like it's all like the same palette that they're all dressed in, which really suggests that they're all on the same page and working together, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I just put that one up there. I think this is the one you shared, Maggie.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the palette, and that came up a lot with the colors in the last couple of nights talking about these, and just how bland and controlled the palette is across the season until maybe you get to Bodie and them fighting for the corner, and sometimes with the vests at the dock. But otherwise, it's a very subdued kind of scene with the clothing, and that it's an interesting. Someone suggested that there was the Greeks were wearing the brown. I think it was I'm forgetting who. I think it was John Meadows. Like the Greeks were wearing the brown, and Ziggy and Nick and Frank were in blue, and there was that notion of the working class blue. They're kind of blue working class, and he was arguing that it was the brown neutrals of the Greeks, that they weren't taking sides, right? Like they were actually serving everybody. And I kind of found that to be kind of an interesting reading through the colors, So, any readings on those colors? Why you think they're so neutral? Like, is that just interesting, or is there a reason you think why?
I don't know. To me, it's just interesting. I can't think of a reason why.
All the pieces matter, Imran.
Okay.
All the pieces matter.
Well,
You want to get kicked out of the circle of trust.
Okay.
Well, I know last season there were like Kima wore a lot of blue, and I know there's something with psychology where like if you wear blue, you're worthy, and especially after she was shot, they had like the blue hat and the blue highlighter stain on the couch were both associated with her. So I think some of the blue that especially like the people in the police force wear, sometimes that might be related to trustworthiness. I know like black, if you wear that, is seen as being much more like professional, and they'll like take you as like a business person and person of power. So you see like Rhonda wearing that. I know red isn't like a color that if you wear that, people are more attracted to you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting here that it seems like with their very bland colors and, Lester's the only one who's really dressed up. There is a certain amount of their like recovery. Like I read that Kima, like she's not fully in yet, right? And I think you can kind of see that when Kima and McNulty get soon reunited. Like it's not the same thing it was in season 1, right? There's not that same sense of a spark and the possibility. And it seems like everything and everyone, at least in the police department, is a bit subdued. Right? Like even this detail is not nearly as compelling or active or kind of really like they're working against something or a group that's really challenging them, right? Kind of towards the end, but really as of now, no.
Yeah, they know everything they need to know, basically, except, for who killed the girls in the can, but they've got this whole drug dealing operation down pat, and it's just putting the nails into the coffin, really.
Yeah, it's interesting,
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to the beginning of season 2 when Herc was making that remark to Kima about how like the white guys are way easier and that like the black people, when they do crime, it's so much more complex. And I think we're seeing that sort of last season was much more difficult and much trickier, and here like all the cards are on the table, sort of.
Yeah, and like they're into the wire for like a day or two, and they already have a tap on the main man. Whereas in the last season, we were decoding phones and numbers and figuring out the code through how they were numbered. I mean, it was such more of a riddle. And this is just straightforward. It's a little bit routine. It's kind of like they all look, like bam, 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 like time to make the donut. It's interesting. All right, excellent. Let's go to another one that was shared. This is the Barbies and bath rods. Here we go. Barbies and bath rods. What did you think about this one? Was this you, Imran?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I remember like when I watched the scene last night, like it was quite interesting. Like how can I say? Like if you saw like the boxes, the color of the boxes, and I forgot his name. The guy who's like trying to open up. Like the color choices like are it's quite like interesting. Like but this scene was quite funny. He got the wrong thing.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about when I saw this, and I saw this scene, is in the back of all this, it's kind of forgotten, but like you open up the season with, this being a dummy for what's behind it, right? And what's behind it is 14 women who die. And Frank says, make sure there's no bodies in that container. Like he always says that now whenever they're stealing anything. It's like, force, make sure there's no bodies. I just think it's interesting that you have a truck full of Barbie dolls.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, there is something being subtly played that, they obviously, this is contraband they don't want. This is kind of they switched it on purpose. But when he starts pulling out dolls out of the box, there's something to consider there about what's being played on this whole season. Here's another one. Speaking of containers and boxes, let's look at this. This, I think, was shared by you, Maggie, and this is Ziggy getting himself into an interesting situation, as always. What about this scene?
Oh, yeah, this is when he's told to start the little fight, and I thought it was interesting with, like, the helmets and, like, who's wearing the hard hats, who's not, and what are the colors. Because we have, I guess, Maui, I think, is the guy that he was fighting, and he's wearing a yellow helmet. And then there's, like, the other guys who are watching, they're wearing white helmets. Ziggy isn't wearing a helmet, and then the two guys who talked him into doing this aren't wearing helmets either, but they're standing with a white helmet. So it was an interesting way of showing the sides in this little conflict.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome reading. And one of the things to think about too is someone brought this up last night when we were watching it. I think it was Danielle suggested that the red containers are always the one that have contraband. Now I haven't looked at it close enough to know. I thought it was fascinating to think that they even color-coded the moments when the contraband is being taken in which containers. Now I'd have to go back and look at every container that was taken, but she mentioned that, and I was wondering if that's true. But the color coding down to what you're talking about there is really compelling if you look at it, to think that there's a kind of reason for just every little detail. Now,
I was interested in that, like, red and orange blue color scheme that's going on in like, it's all over the docks.
yeah. Well, here's another one. This might make your point, Paul. This is shared by Maggie.
Yeah. That whole scene sort of made me think of it's Jimmy Cagney, Top of the World.
Oh yeah, that's right. White Heat.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. Look at that. What do you think, Maggie? You shared this.
Yeah, well, I thought it was an interesting camera angle because normally when like a camera is poised that way, it's meant to make like the people above it look very big and very strong and like they have a lot of power. And you know, Ziggy is at the highest point. You would think that that would mean he has the most power, but he looks really tiny and really scrawny, and we've just seen like Maui put him up there, and here we see Maui and he looks very big and strong. And so I thought that was an interesting juxtaposition.
Well, it's also well said because, I mean, it kind of reinforces a lot of the subversion that Simon said from the first episodes happened, right? Like trying to subvert the idea of the police drama and subvert the idea of power and who's in power. And that shot, like you said, usually when you're looking up with a camera like that to, you know, that famous Orson Welles with Citizen Kane, it's these shots that are dug into the ground to make that person look so much more powerful. And this way, it doesn't work that way, right? It's actually the person who's up you're looking up to is actually, you know, very, not only not powerful, but kind of despisable. And I wonder if you can read within a shot like that when you're looking up to these people. You know, some of the people we're looking up to through the cinema or through the TV show are actually despisable, the people in power. And so it's interesting if you think and read through what might a camera angle like that mean, maybe more broadly. That's cool. All right. I think you guys are going to like this one. I'm sorry, Paul.
The thing that's interesting about that color scheme, let me call this one up. In the shop where all the contraband goes, Giorgio's place, you can kind of see that red, orange, blue color scheme going on in the background there. I just thought that was interesting when you, as the camera panned through there, you saw that in like the notebook he's carrying and the countertop and the shelving in the background. You see all those same colors again. Yeah,
and it's interesting too. I mean, one of the things that struck me about his place of work is also that design. The design that we had, the insurance office for the police department, right? These kind of very cubicle, you know, glazed glass, really kind of institutional look. And same with this, what I think is an electronics store, right? Are we clear on that? It has that same feel, like you've been into that Best Buy or Circuit City. It's more of a Circuit City one back in the day. But it's that very kind of, you know, box store, formulaic, you know, prefab consumer experience that you really see. And it's like, you know, you can really, like with Russell's shirt from Target that we talked about last episode, you really can familiarize yourself with this place and the products they sell. And it's just interesting to think where they come from, right? Like, you know, what we're seeing is the other side of that. Like, where do these products come from? Well, they fell off the boat, literally, right? They fell off the truck, literally. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. I like that. Well, one of the namesakes for this episode, I think Was you, Imran, or was this Maggie? You guys can speak up because I didn't specify that. We have Ziggy and his little friend.
Oh, that was me.
Yeah.
I think I'm just I'm still quite debating like that particular scene when I watched it last night. Like he got like other options to choose like chicken or like a duck, but he chose that duck particularly.
Yeah. And he says something about like pigeons have fleas or whatever he says. But one of the things I'm struck by, this is one of the reasons I actually liked Ziggy this season and this time around, is he buys that duck a diamond-studded necklace, and I don't like the fact that he drinks and the duck dies. So I don't feel like that's good. I don't want to suggest I'm celebrating that, but he treats money in a way that no one else in the show does. He burns $100 bills at the bar. He takes Nick's money, he throws it out the window, completely cared about that. And he's almost a radical figure in this world because of his brutal disregard of money. And I don't think that saves him in any way or makes him, a special, strong character like Nick's dad. But it is interesting that in a world dominated by money and by the power of money to persuade and control, it's almost as if Ziggy's craziness comes from his refusal to accept that. And the duck is just another instance. You'll notice when he buys the duck, he puts a load of money in that gentleman's pocket. And he does that all the time. And there's the sense that Ziggy's kind of outside of what drives 99% of the people who are in the game, which I find fascinating about it.
Yeah, if you go back to that restaurant conversation, Donette tells D'Angelo, you got money, you can be whatever you say you want to be.
Yeah.
And Ziggy wants to be something that he's not going to be.
Yeah.
He wants to be a player, he wants to be in the game, but he's too much of a stupid goofball to actually do it. And the money is never going to put him there.
Yeah. And the fact that people give him money almost just seems to drive him more crazy. Like, It's not for the money that he's doing it. And if it was, he would just be sitting and living off of Nick's generosity. So there's something about money and Ziggy that fascinates me, and it's almost like he refuses the very logic of how the game is played. And I find that interesting, even though it doesn't save him in any way, but I do find it interesting. Yeah. Ziggy, he's a revelation for me this time around. I hated him the first time. Now I hate Nick. I hate Nick. I find Nick completely annoying, and I kind of am endeared to Ziggy. Who knew? I got another one here, and this is an interesting one. Thanks for sharing this. This one is of McNulty leaving the house. I think he's at Russell's house, right? He drives her home, and then there's this kind of almost like relationship tension going on, and then it's completely diffused because he's like, I gotta go. And the thing that was interesting to me, Imran, about the scene, and I wonder if this is why you shared it, is that he was actually, it seemed like something's going to happen. He kind of investigates her kitchen, and he has step away from the cookie jar, right? Like the total idea of the fake cop. And then he looks at the fridge, sees a picture, ostensibly of the children, something happens, and then he's leaving, right?
Yeah.
What you guys make of that?
Now thinking back to the whole, like, step away from the cookie jar, in some ways, like, that could almost mean, like, step away from Russell as, like, the prized or, like, the sweet thing that he's going after. And there's just so much, like, of her work, like, even her kids, like, it was another example of her kids playing with her work, because on, like, one of the end tables in the living room, there's, like, a police car and a bunch of, like, policemen, little, like, army men figures scattered about. And I don't know, I think the pictures on the fridge, though, sort of, I think one of them, like, the kids was playing soccer, and McNulty's son was playing soccer, and so it was sort of just like a reminder of, like, are you just trying to replace what you've lost, or do you want to go and like continue to try and get back and like make the best of what you already have?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Interesting. I mean, that's on the last night during the discussion. A few people brought that reading up too, and I didn't think about the cookie jar and Russell and that relationship, but that's nice. And I didn't pick up all the details of the toy, police paraphernalia around. But it's interesting too because the kids in that situation do represent something he was recently trying to save. But also someone mentioned that, the idea of someone moving into his space and his house and what that might mean in terms of his own kids. Because it's inevitable. I think we see that now. His wife made it clear that it's over. And struggling with him being that person on the other side, it's a rich moment because it's laden with possible readings, but never laid clear, which I really liked about it.
There was a point earlier, might have been in the first season, where Bunk tells Jimmy, you're no good for people. You just ruin them. And he might have like picked up on that, as he's like seeing he's got this like nice little family here, and is he the right guy, in the right position to step into that?
Yeah.
Because I think at that point there, he's just a dog, Even though you don't hear them barking. That's
Imran, you brought this up. It was your picture, so thank you. But I didn't want to cut you off. But I usually do.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Anything you wanted to say about that one?
It's basically like what Maggie said, like about like like his son, like he like plays soccer, and then like he sees something like that her son is like soccer too, and like when I watched that scene last night, I was like quite thinking like why is he like investigating her house, and then he just like leaves, like he just want to get involved himself, like he just went home, he just like left completely.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the first time I saw it. I didn't disagree. I felt like, what's going on there? Like, is Jimmy having a moment of conscience, which doesn't often happen, or a crisis of conscience about it? But it is, and I like that because he was terrible. I mean, didn't this episode open up with him drunk driving, and then having a cheap relationship with the waitress? And that's how it opens up, and it's really, really abject, right? He's completely beyond himself. He does the same thing, drunk driving, into the same pole twice, kind of reinforcing the idea that he keeps on making the same mistakes and can't help himself, and goes about the same things that got him into the problems that he's in now, like extramarital relationships, and how could his wife trust him? And then you get to this moment where he's realizing one's over. He's obviously not ready for another, and it's almost like at that moment he realizes, hey, there's a problem here, and maybe I'm at the base of it. And it just was an interesting moment because you could also think like, oh, he's not interested in her, he wants to go, or whatever you want to read it in. But I just love the way they did it. And maybe more clues than I could pick up now that Maggie and Imran talk about it a bit. But at first I was like, that's just an interesting switch. You got some? That's all the images I have from you all. Paul, you have any images?
I've got actually another McNulty shot here, so let me share this. And this is McNulty coming off the boat. He just got the call from Daniels that he's switched to his detail. The thing I liked about this is you look at that screen and the bars, it's like totally coming out of jail when he walks out of it,
Yeah, it is an ascension, right? He's walking up that ramp, right? And it's free.
I like that when Daniels talked to McNulty, and like when I didn't like hear last night, I just watched it, like you saw like a little like a smirk that Daniels and McNulty did.
Yeah.
Like McNulty's coming back.
Yeah, he did have that smirk, right?
Yeah. Awesome.
What else about episode 8? Anything else? Anything about the epigraph? Uh, the Ziggy epigraph? Ziggy gets his own epigraph, which is good for him. Any ideas about why won't they just fly away?
I think that the epigraph sort of speaks to um, just like this whole thing we've been grappling with money and not being able to get out of where you are, and so like cycles keep going on and on. Like we see all these dock workers that it's just many generations, and to them it's sort of a point of pride that like my father worked here and I work here and my son works here and we're all doing these blue collar jobs, and so they're sort of holding on to it, but they're also are starting to lose these jobs and aren't working a lot, but they also like don't know how to do anything else, and so they're resorting to things. And then we saw in the previous season with the projects and like the inability to get out of that lifestyle, and you see Wallace, who is like, this is all I have, and he ends up dying in the projects,
Yeah,
that type of thing. And I think this is just like clipping the wings of sort of like financially restraining all these people, and so they can't go anywhere.
it's true. I think that's a great reading. And the illegal immigrants, you have a whole new crew of workers and women who are in there who have no move, right? Like everything they do is they're chaperoned from one space to another. They're basically in prison, right? The stevedores with the closing of the dock, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really interesting way. And just as a side note, George Pelicanos wrote this episode, and he's actually a famous novelist or an established novelist. Writes a lot about DC. Paul, we had the big blowdown on the syllabus for the hard-boiled class we taught, but we never got to it. But it's interesting that he did this one. And another interesting fact about this one is Ziggy references Stephen L. Miles, which I realize is a Baltimore lawyer remembered by locals due to the local-run late-night commercial advertising his firm. So it's actually a very localized Baltimore reference to a lawyer who was on late-night TV. And I found that interesting that, it's kind of like what you did, Paul, with the Littman reference. Like, that's a very inside joke with forgetting his name, with Simon and his wife who wrote those novels. And here's another one that probably only Baltimore folks would get, which I really love that stuff. I mean, kind of the idea that this show, reminding us that this show is not about McNulty, it's not about Sabaka, it's not about Wallace, it's not about D as much as we love D. It's about Baltimore, right? It's about the city. So,
Yeah,
cool.
that's good. Because probably every city has, the TV shyster who's chasing ambulances and whatever. Because I know we've got them here in Johnstown, and we had one in Rochester before I came here, and I'm sure they're everywhere. But unless you're in Baltimore, that name doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's offhanded. You don't think anything about it because you hear a lot of names. But in this case, it's actually it's interesting because I think it reinforces a little bit what Simon's trying to get at with the city. Any last thoughts about episode 8?
There was a conversation between Frank and his brother, who doesn't want to be corrupted, and he doesn't care that he doesn't need the new car, he doesn't need the new kitchen. And then at the ending scene, you had a similar parallel. I've actually got a shot of it here, where the Greek and Nick and Spiros, they're all in conversation. But the Greek says to Frank, you should do something with your money. You should buy something nice for yourself. That's what this is all about. Whereas Frank is like sort of adamant, like, no, that's not what this is about.
Well, that's actually I didn't connect the two because I was very struck with Frank's brother. but I didn't make the link to that moment when the Greek says that, because it's almost like the consumer culture seeping in here. It's like, all we're really doing, we have no morals. There's no ethics. The girls that die as a result of what we're shipping, the drugs that kill lives, all the nightmare work we're doing, let's put that out of your mind. That has nothing to do with it. Go buy yourself something nice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought it was funny, like the two examples he gives of what to buy are a car and a coat, and Ziggy bought a coat and Nick bought a car. That was really interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really subtle, well-done critique on the part of Simon and Pelicanos, I imagine, in this case, of like the larger structural institution of economic capitalism that's driving a lot of this corruption and greed and crime and violence. And it's a beautiful way to get at it. You know what I mean? So, wow. It's interesting.
It's interesting coming from the Greek, too, because, I mean, he's, like I said before, he's sort of the top dog in this whole series,
Yeah.
But he's in this, like, really crappy little dive, and he dresses like he should be hanging out with Bubbles,
It does kind of look like Bubbles with the hat, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably got more money than everyone else put together, but he's not showing any flash, and if he's buying anything nice, we're not seeing it.
And it's interesting that that's one of the things they say about Sabaka early on, is he doesn't show any flash. Right? Like this guy, like when they're trying to say, do you have anything on Sabaka? And they're like, basically they pull out their notebook and they're like, no priors, no blah, 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 and he shows no flash, right? Until they find out that he's paying the lobbyist 70 grand or whatever, but all his flash is going towards that. But it is, yeah. That's a really interesting takeaway from this episode. It actually notches it up for me in my mind, the link of those two. And the other thing is that Sabaka's brother is such a rarity. We don't see characters like that, right? Like, they're 1 in a million in this series. Because people are actually able to resist the new kitchen, or resist the new car, or resist some basic kind of amenities now that we seem to define us as a culture and our happiness. And so it's interesting to see someone like that.
Yeah, I mean, basically he turns down like some no-show job that's just going to pay him a little bit of money. As far as corruption goes, it's like not that much, it seems to me. But he's not even going to step down that road.
Yeah, that's right. It's good to know he's out there. Because if you watch enough Wire episodes, you begin to forget that there's actually good people around too. All right. Anything else? That was awesome. Imran? You don't have to. I'm just asking. Big fan. I love all of your feedback. And you're wearing red. And you know what Maggie says about red? That it's an attractor. So that's why I went to you first. And plus, Maggie's shirt is flipping me off, so I'm afraid to go to that one. See? See what I mean? All right. Well, that was awesome, guys. And just in time. So, signing off, Paul?
All right. Till next time. Wire106 for life.
That for life. Thanks, Imran. Thanks, Maggie. You guys rule.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Circle of Trust.
All right.